The steady beep of hospital machines filled the quiet room as James sat next to his mother's bed, his fingers gently wrapped around her thin hand, feeling how fragile she had become. The afternoon sun peeked through half-drawn blinds, casting long shadows across the sterile floor. Linda Taylor had once been the kind of woman who could command a room with her laugh. She was the neighborhood mom who baked cookies for every child on the block and never missed a school event. Now, after fighting cancer for 3 long years, she looked like a shadow of herself. Her once round cheeks had hollowed, and her bright eyes had dimmed, but the warmth in them when she looked at her son remained unchanged. "Want some water?" James asked, noticing her dry lips. He reached for the small cup with its bent straw, gently lifting her head so she could take a few sips. "Thank you, honey," she whispered, her voice scratchy and thin. "You should go home and get some real sleep. That chair looks awful." James shook his head. "I'm staying right here." He'd barely left this room for a week, sleeping in short bursts. On the uncomfortable hospital chair, his tall frame cramped and his back aching. But none of that mattered. The doctors had been clear, days, maybe hours left. His sister Jenny was trying to catch a flight from Seattle, but bad weather had delayed all planes. "Stubborn, just like your father," Linda said with the ghost of a smile. James tried to return the smile, but it felt wrong on his face. His father had passed away from a heart attack 5 years ago, a sudden shock that had left them all reeling. This slow goodbye was different, both harder and somehow kinder because they had time. "Mrs. Taylor." A nurse with kind eyes poked her head in. "Time for your medicine. And James, there's a fresh pot of coffee at the nurse's station if you want some." James nodded gratefully. The hospital staff had been wonderful, bringing him extra blankets and making sure he ate something each day. Small kindnesses that kept him going. As the nurse checked Linda's vitals and adjusted her IV, James stepped out into the hallway. He leaned against the wall, letting out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The hospital corridor buzzed with quiet activity. Doctors reviewing charts, visitors speaking in hushed tones, the squeaky wheels of medicine carts. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was Jenny. "Hey," he answered, his voice low. "How is she today?" His sister sounded like she'd been crying. "About the same. Tired. She's still making jokes, though." "That sounds like Mom." Jenny's voice cracked. "They've canceled all flights. Until tomorrow morning. I'm going crazy here. I should be there." "I know, she knows too." James rubbed his eyes. "I'm telling her everything you said in your texts. Tell her I love her. Tell her I'm trying to get there as fast as I can." "I will. Love you, sis, love you too." James slipped the phone back into his pocket and grabbed a styrofoam cup of coffee before returning to the room. The nurse had finished, and his mother seemed to be sleeping. He settled back into the chair, sipping the bitter liquid, grateful for its warmth and the jolt of caffeine. Outside the window he could see the hospital parking lot, people coming and going. Life continuing its normal pace while in this room, time seemed to stand still. He thought about all the things his mother had taught him, how to ride a bike, how to treat others with kindness, how to make her famous apple pie with the perfect crust. She had raised him and Jenny alone after their father walked out when they were little. Years later, she had met and married Robert, who became the father they needed. Their family hadn't been perfect, but it had been filled with love. The memory of last Christmas floated into his mind. His mother had insisted on hosting despite being in the middle of chemo treatments. She'd worn a bright red sweater and a Santa hat over her thinning hair, determined to make it special. They had all known it would likely be her last holiday, though no one said it out loud. "James?" His mother's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Her eyes were open, clearer than they had been in days. "I'm here, Mom." He set down his coffee and leaned forward. "Did I fall asleep?" she asked. "Just for a little while." Jenny called. Her flight's delayed because of weather, but she'll be here tomorrow. Linda nodded slowly. "That's good." She paused, seeming to gather her strength. "Could you help me sit up a bit?" James carefully adjusted her pillows and raised the head of the bed slightly. "Better?" Yes, thank you. She looked around the room, at the get well cards lining the windowsill, the vase of bright yellow daisies that her book club friends had brought yesterday. It's a nice room, isn't it? They've been good to me here. The best, James agreed, though he hated everything about this place. The antiseptic smell, the constant beeping, the forced cheerfulness of some of the staff. But he understood what his mother was doing. Even now, she was trying to make things easier for him. Remember when you broke your arm climbing that big oak tree in the backyard? She asked suddenly. James smiled at the unexpected memory. I was what? 9? You told me not to climb it. You never were good at listening, she teased. I was so scared when I heard you scream. Found you sitting there trying not to cry with your arm all twisted. And you didn't even say I told you so. Oh, but I thought it. She laughed softly, the sound turning into a small cough. You were always so brave even then. James swallowed hard. I learned it from you. They sat quietly for a while, the afternoon light shifting across the room. A doctor came in, checked her chart, asked a few questions, and left again. The dinner cart rolled by, but Linda had no appetite. James picked at a sandwich from the cafeteria, unable to taste it. As evening approached, Linda seemed to grow more restless. Could you open the curtains? I'd like to see the sunset. James pulled the curtains wide. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks, the sun sinking behind the city skyline. It's beautiful, she whispered. It is, he agreed, though he was looking at her, not the sunset. James, she said after a long moment, I need to tell you something. He moved closer, taking her hand again. What is it, Mom? She seemed to struggle with herself, her eyes searching his face as if memorizing it. I've been thinking about what I want you to know, what's important to say when there's not much time left. James felt his throat tighten. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted gently. A mother should tell her son these things. She took a labored breath. I'm so proud of the man you've become. Your kindness, your strength, how you always stand up for what's right. I couldn't have asked for a better son. Tears welled in James's eyes. Mom, let me finish, she said, her voice growing weaker. Life will throw hard things at you after I'm gone. Promise me you'll keep your heart open. Don't close yourself off to love or joy because of grief, I promise, he managed to say. She nodded, seeming satisfied. Then a strange look crossed her face. Determination mixed with something else. Fear. Regret. There's something else, she said, her voice suddenly urgent. Something I should have told you long ago. James leaned closer. What is it? She motioned for him to come nearer, and he bent his head close to hers. Her breath was warm against his ear as she summoned her strength and whispered 5 words. The key is with Peter. James pulled back slightly, confusion written across his face. Peter? Who's Peter, Mom? But Linda's eyes had closed, her breathing becoming more labored. The monitors beside her bed began to change their rhythm, beeping faster. Mom? James stood up, alarm coursing through him. Mom, who's Peter? What key? Her eyes fluttered open, once more finding his filled with an emotion he couldn't read. She tried to speak again, but no sound came out. Then her hand went limp in his, and the monitors erupted into a high-pitched alarm. Help! James shouted, pressing the emergency button repeatedly. Somebody help! The room suddenly filled with medical staff moving with practiced urgency. A nurse gently but firmly pulled James away from the bed. Sir, you need to step outside, she said. That's my mother. He protested, his voice breaking. I know. We're doing everything we can. Please, just give us room to work. In a daze, James found himself in the hallway, watching through the doorway as doctors and nurses worked over his mother's still form. Time seemed to stretch and warp. He couldn't say how long he stood there, his back pressed against the cold wall, prayers and pleas running through his mind. Finally, a doctor emerged, her face solemn. Mr. Taylor, I'm very sorry. We did everything we could, but your mother has passed away." The words hit him like a physical blow, even though he had been preparing for this moment for weeks, months even. Nothing could have readied him for the finality of it. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Of course. James moved back into the quiet room. The machines were silent now, their screens dark. His mother lay peacefully, as if sleeping, but he knew she was gone. He sat beside her and took her hand one last time. It was still warm. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he sat in the gathering darkness, holding on to his mother and her last mysterious words. Who was Peter? What key had she been talking about? In her final moments, she had given him not just a goodbye, but what seemed like a puzzle. Her last gift, or perhaps her last request. As grief washed over him in waves, one thought surfaced. Through the pain, he would find out what those 5 whispered words meant. He owed her that much and more. The days after Linda's death passed in a blur for James. The funeral arrangements, the steady stream of visitors bringing casseroles and condolences, the paperwork. It all seemed to happen around him rather than to him. He moved through these tasks like a man underwater, everything muffled and distant. Jenny had finally arrived the morning after their mother passed, too late to say goodbye. The guilt of this weighed heavily on her, and James did his best to comfort his sister despite his own grief. "She knew you were trying to get here," he told her, as they sat at their mother's kitchen table the night after the funeral. The house felt too quiet, too empty without Linda's presence. "She wasn't alone, Jenny. I was with her." Jenny wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "Did she say anything at the end?" James hesitated. He hadn't told anyone about his mother's strange last words. They felt private somehow, a final message meant only for him. But this was Jenny, his sister, who had loved their mother just as much as he had. "She told me she was proud of us," he said, which was true. "And she said—" He paused, uncertain how to explain. "She mentioned someone named Peter. Said the key is with Peter. Does that mean anything to you?" Jenny frowned, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Peter? I don't think I know any Peter connected to Mom. Maybe an old friend? That's what I've been wondering." She seemed really determined to tell me, like it was important. "What kind of key?" Jenny asked. James shrugged. "No idea. It could be literal, like a house key or something. Or maybe it's metaphorical, a key to understanding something." They fell silent, both lost in thought. Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows of the house where they'd grown up. "We should go through her things tomorrow," Jenny said finally. "Start sorting out what needs to be done with the house and everything. Maybe we'll find some clue about this Peter person." James nodded, though the thought of packing away his mother's life into boxes made his chest ache. "Yeah, we should." He. Next morning, they began the painful process of going through Linda's belongings. They started with her bedroom, carefully opening drawers and closets that held the everyday items of their mother's life. Clothes neatly folded, jewelry in small boxes, books stacked on the nightstand. "Look at this," Jenny said, holding up an old photo album she'd found at the back of the closet. "I haven't seen this one before." They sat together on the edge of the bed and opened it. Unlike the family albums they were familiar with, this one contained much older photos, pictures of their mother when she was young, before either of them had been born. "Mom looks so different," James said, studying a photo of Linda in her early 20s, laughing with a group of friends on what looked like a beach trip. Her hair was longer than he'd ever seen it, and there was a carefree joy in her expression. That struck him. It was strange to see his mother as a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, separate from her identity as their mom. They turned the pages slowly, examining each photo. There were pictures of Linda at college, at parties, hiking in mountains they didn't recognize. And then, about halfway through the album, they found a photo that made them both pause. It showed their mother sitting on a park bench with a young man. They were looking at each other, not at the camera, both smiling. The man had his arm around Linda's shoulders, and they looked happy, comfortable together. "Who's that?" Jenny asked. "That's not Dad, and it's definitely not Robert." Their stepfather had been a stocky man with a beard. This person was tall and lean with dark curly hair. James turned the photo over. On the back, in their mother's handwriting, was written, "Summer Picnic with Peter, 1983. They looked at each other. "Peter," James said quietly. "This has to be him." Jenny nodded slowly. "But who is he? Mom never mentioned anyone named Peter to me. Did she ever talk to you about him?" "Never," James replied, studying the photo more closely. Their mother would have been about 23 in 1983, a few years before she met their father. Maybe an old boyfriend? They continued through the album, finding a few more pictures of this same man, Peter and Linda, at what looked like a carnival, standing by a vintage car hiking on a forest trail. In every photo, they looked happy together. But after a certain point, he disappeared from the pictures, and there was no explanation why. The rest of the day was spent sorting through more of Linda's belongings. They found nothing else related to Peter. No letters, no mementos, nothing that would explain who he was or what key their mother had been referring to. By evening, they were both tired and frustrated. "Maybe we're overthinking this," Jenny suggested as they ordered pizza for dinner, neither of them having the energy to cook. Maybe it was just the medication talking or confusion. People sometimes say strange things at the end. James shook his head. "No, she was really clear about it. You didn't see her face, Jenny. It was important to her." He took a sip of his soda. "I'm going to look through her desk tomorrow. Maybe there's something there." The next morning, after Jenny left to meet with the funeral home about some final arrangements, James settled at his mother's small desk in the corner of the living room. It was an old piece of furniture, solid oak with 3 drawers on each side, and a roll top that opened to reveal small cubby holes and compartments. He started with the drawers, methodically going through each one. The top drawers contained the expected items: pens, notepads, paper clips, stamps. The middle drawers held files, insurance documents, house papers, medical records. The bottom drawers contained miscellaneous items: old greeting cards, a small sewing kit, batteries. Nothing about Peter. Sighing, James rolled up the desktop and began examining the small compartments inside. Most were empty or contained only old receipts and business cards. But in the very back, behind a small wooden panel that seemed designed to hide its contents, he found a small address book bound in faded red leather. Heart beating faster, James opened it. Most of the pages were blank, but near the middle, under W, a single entry caught his eye: Peter Wilson, 145 Oakwood Lane, Pineville. There was a phone number too, but it had been crossed out and no new one written in its place. The address was in a town about 3 hours' drive from where they lived. James had never heard his mother mention Pineville before. He sat back in the chair, staring at the address. Could this really be the Peter his mother had mentioned? And if so, what key did he have? Only one way to find out. When Jenny returned, James showed her his discovery. "You want to drive to Pineville?" she asked, surprised. "What if this isn't even the right Peter? Or what if he doesn't live there anymore? That address book looks ancient." "I have to try," James insisted. "Mom used her last breaths to tell me about this. It must be important." Jenny looked uncertain. "I can't go with you. I have to fly back tomorrow. I've already extended my leave from work as much as I could." "I know. I'll go alone," James said. "If I find anything, I'll call you right away." After dropping Jenny at the airport the next day, James packed an overnight bag just in case and set off for Pineville. The drive took him through rolling countryside, small towns, and stretches of forest. His mind was full of questions as he drove. Who was Peter Wilson? What had he meant to his mother? And why had she never mentioned him to her children? Pineville turned out to be a picturesque small town with a main street lined with shops and cafes, surrounded by neighborhoods of well-kept homes. James followed his GPS to Oakwood Lane, a quiet street of modest houses with neat front yards and large shade trees. Number 145 was a small blue house with white trim and a covered porch. A well-tended garden filled the front yard, and wind chimes tinkled softly from the porch ceiling. It looked like the kind of place where someone had lived for many years, putting down roots and making it truly a home. James parked across the street and sat for a moment, suddenly nervous. What would he say? "Hi, my dying mother mentioned your name and something about a key." It sounded crazy, but he had come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, he got out of the car, walked up the path to the front door, and knocked. For a long moment, there was no response, and James wondered if no one was home. Then he heard slow footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal an elderly man with thinning white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was tall but slightly stooped with age, and he leaned on a wooden cane. Despite the years that must have passed since those photos were taken, James recognized him immediately as the man from his mother's album. The same distinctive nose, the same shape to his jaw. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice warm but puzzled. James swallowed, hard. "Are you Peter Wilson?" "I am," the man replied, studying James with increasing curiosity. "And who might you be?" "My name is James Taylor. Linda Taylor was my mother." The effect of these words was immediate and shocking. All the color drained from Peter's face, and he gripped the doorframe as if to steady himself. For a moment, James thought the elderly man might collapse. "Linda's son," Peter whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He stared at James as if seeing a ghost. "My God, you look like her." He seemed to collect himself with effort. "Please come in. I've been expecting you, though I didn't know when you'd come." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Linda told me that someday you might find your way to my door." As James stepped across the threshold, his heart pounding with anticipation and uncertainty, he knew he was about to uncover a secret his mother had kept hidden for decades. Whatever waited for him inside this house would change everything he thought he knew about his family and about himself. Peter Wilson's living room was warm and cozy, filled with bookshelves, comfortable furniture, and the soft ticking of an old grandfather clock. Family photos lined the mantel above a brick fireplace, and a large window overlooked a backyard garden. It felt like a place where memories had been carefully preserved. "Please sit down," Peter said, gesturing to an armchair as he lowered himself onto the sofa with the careful movements of someone managing old joints. "Can I get you anything? Water? Tea?" "No, thank you," James replied, perching on the edge of the chair, his overnight bag at his feet. He couldn't take his eyes off Peter's face, searching for, what? Some explanation for why his mother had sent him here? Some resemblance to himself? An awkward silence fell between them. "So, Linda, has passed?" Peter finally asked, his voice gentle but pained. James nodded. "Last week. Cancer." Peter closed his eyes briefly. "I'm very sorry. She was a remarkable woman." "How did you know her?" James asked, unable to wait any longer. "She mentioned you just before she died. She said, 'The key is with Peter.' Does that mean anything to you?" Peter's weathered hands trembled slightly as he placed them on his knees. "Yes, it means something to me." He looked directly at James, his gaze both kind and deeply serious. "But before I explain, I need to ask how much your mother told you about me." "Nothing," James admitted. "I never heard your name until her final moments. My sister and I found some old photos of you two together from the early '80s. Peter nodded slowly, as if this confirmed what he had expected. "I see. This won't be easy then." He took a deep breath. "Perhaps I should start at the beginning." He reached for a framed photo on the side table and handed it to James. It showed a much younger Peter and Linda, standing close together on what looked like a college campus, autumn leaves scattered around their feet. "I met your mother in 1981, during her sophomore year at Westlake College. I was a teaching assistant in her literature class." Peter's voice softened with the memory. "She was the brightest student I'd ever met, passionate about books, full of ideas. We started talking after class, then meeting for coffee to discuss novels, poetry." James studied the photo. His mother looked so young, so carefree. Her smile was the same one he remembered from his childhood. We fell in love, Peter continued simply. It wasn't appropriate, of course. I was her TA. But we were only 4 years apart in age, and once the semester ended, there was no rule against it. We dated for almost 2 years. He stood up slowly, walked to a wooden cabinet in the corner of the room, and returned with a small, worn book. This was her favorite Frost's collected poems. She used to read them aloud in this very room. James took the book carefully. Inside the cover, in his mother's familiar handwriting, was an inscription. To Peter, who walks the road less traveled with me. All my love, Linda. I don't understand, James said, looking up from the book. If you were so close, why didn't she ever mention you? And what happened between you? Peter sat back down with a heavy sigh. We were very much in love planning our future together, and then in the spring of 1983 I asked her to marry me. A faint smile touched his lips. She said yes immediately. We were so happy, so full of plans. His expression darkened. But your grandmother, Linda's mother, she didn't approve of me. I came from a working-class family, was still finishing my PhD, didn't have much money or prospects. She wanted more for her daughter. James frowned. He remembered his grandmother as a stern woman who rarely showed affection. She had passed away when he was 15. What happened? He prompted when Peter fell silent. Your grandmother told Linda that I had been seeing someone else, another student. It wasn't true, not a word of it. But she had evidence, letters, supposedly from this other girl to me. They were forgeries, but convincing ones. Peter's voice grew tight with old pain. Linda confronted me. I denied it, of course, but the seed of doubt had been planted. We argued terribly. She gave me back my ring and told me never to contact her again. And you just let her go? James couldn't keep the accusation from his voice. Peter looked at him sadly. I tried to talk to her to make her understand, but she wouldn't see me. I called. I wrote letters. All returned unopened. Finally, I respected her wishes and stopped trying. He shook his head slowly. It was the biggest mistake of my life. So what's this key she mentioned? James asked, bringing the conversation back to his mother's final words. Peter stood again, this time moving with purpose despite his stiff gait. Wait here a moment. He disappeared down a hallway and returned a few minutes later carrying a small wooden box, ornately carved with a pattern of leaves and vines. He placed it on the coffee table between them. About 5 years ago, I got a call out of the blue. It was Linda. She told me her husband, your stepfather Robert, had passed away. She'd been going through old papers and found her mother's diary. In it, she discovered the truth about what her mother had done all those years ago. James leaned forward, fascinated and disturbed by this tale of his family he'd never known. Linda came to see me. Peter continued. We talked for hours, clearing away decades of misunderstanding. She visited several times after that, whenever she could make an excuse to be in this area. We were reconnecting. His voice faltered. Then she got sick. Peter's fingers traced the carvings on the box. During her last visit, when she knew the cancer was terminal, she brought me this box. She made me promise to keep it safe until you came looking for me. He pushed the box toward James. This is what she meant by the key. It's inside. With trembling hands, James opened the box. Inside lay an envelope with his name written on it in his mother's handwriting. A small brass key and a folded document. I don't know what's in the letter, Peter said quietly. That's between you and your mother, but I know what the key is for. James picked up the envelope first, feeling its weight in his hands. His throat tight with emotion, he opened it and began to read. My dearest James, if you're reading this, I've passed on, and you found Peter. There's something I've kept from you your entire life, something I was too afraid to tell you face to face, though I've wanted to many times. Peter Wilson is your biological father. I know this will come as a shock. I've struggled with whether telling you is the right thing to do. Robert loved you as his own from the moment he met you, and in every way that matters, he was your father. I never wanted to diminish what he meant to you. But you deserve to know the truth about where you came from. When Peter and I broke up, I didn't know I was pregnant. By the time I realized, I was convinced he had betrayed me and my pride wouldn't let me tell him. I met your father, the man you knew as your father, a few months later. He knew I was pregnant when we married, and he chose to raise you as his own. He was a good man, James. Please don't think less of him for this deception. It was my choice, not his. It was only after Robert died that I discovered my mother's role in separating Peter and me. The shock of learning how she had manipulated us both made me question everything. I reached out to Peter and found him still living in the same town, still alone. He never married, never had other children. When I told him about you, he was overwhelmed. He wanted to meet you immediately, but I asked him to wait. I needed time to figure out how to tell you, how to explain my decades of silence. Then I got sick and time ran out. The key enclosed is to a safety deposit box at Pineville First Bank. Inside are papers that legally acknowledge Peter as your biological father, should you choose to accept this truth. There are also some things I've saved for you over the years. I don't expect you to forgive me for keeping this secret. I don't expect you to embrace Peter as your father. I only ask that you try to understand that we all did what we thought was best at the time with the information we had. Know that I have always loved you, completely and without reservation. That truth has never changed and never will. Mom. James lowered the letter, his vision blurred with tears. The room seemed to tilt around him as the foundation of his identity shifted. He looked up at Peter, his father, who was watching him with anxious eyes. "You're my father," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. Peter nodded, his own eyes glistening. "I didn't know, James. Not until Linda told me 5 years ago. If I had known..." "She never told you she was pregnant?" "Never. And I would have..." Peter's voice broke. "I would have been there. For both of you." James stared at the man across from him, this stranger who had suddenly become the most important link to his past. He could see it now. The same tall build, the same shape of the hands, even something in the way they both tilted their heads slightly when thinking. "I have 1,000 questions," James said finally. "I have a lifetime of answers," Peter replied, a cautious hope in his voice. "If you want to hear them." James picked up the small brass key from the box. This tangible connection to his mother's final wishes felt heavy in his palm. Tomorrow, he would go to the bank and discover what else she had left for him. But tonight, he needed to begin understanding. The man sitting across from him, the man whose blood ran in his veins. "Tell me about yourself," James said. "Tell me everything I should have known growing up." As the evening light faded outside the windows, Peter began to speak, filling in the empty spaces of a story that had been waiting 40 years to be told. James woke early the next morning on Peter's guest room bed, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight streamed through curtains he didn't recognize, and the pillow beneath his head carried a scent of laundry detergent different from his own. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. The drive to Pineville, meeting Peter, the letter that had changed everything. He lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to process it all. Peter Wilson was his biological father, the man he had grown up calling Dad, who had taught him to ride a bike, helped with his homework, and cheered at his graduations, had known all along that James wasn't his biological child. Yet he had loved James completely, never once letting on that there was any secret between them. The weight of these revelations pressed on James's chest. He felt a confusing mix of emotions: anger at his mother for keeping this truth from him for so long, gratitude toward the man who had raised him without reservation, and a strange, tentative curiosity about Peter, the man whose blood ran in his veins. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted under the door. James glanced at his phone, just past 7. He had slept surprisingly well, considering the circumstances. After reading his mother's letter, he and Peter had talked for hours. Peter had shared stories of his youth, his family background, his career as a history professor at the local community college. He had shown James old photos, explained medical history James should know about, and answered every question with a patience that suggested he had been waiting decades for this conversation. James had called Jenny late in the evening, sharing the incredible news. She had been stunned, demanding to know every detail. "Are you sure?" she had asked repeatedly. "This isn't some kind of scam." James had assured her it wasn't. The letter was undeniably in their mother's handwriting, and the photos Peter had shown him left little room for doubt. Besides, what would Peter have to gain by lying? Jenny had insisted on coming to Pineville as soon as she could get away from work again, needing to see this family revelation for herself. Now, as James pulled on yesterday's clothes and splashed water on his face in the small guest bathroom, he felt oddly calm. The initial shock had given way to a sort of acceptance. This was his reality now. A new father, a new history, a new understanding of his family. Peter looked up from the stove when James entered the kitchen. "Good morning," he said, a hint of nervousness in his smile. "I hope you slept okay. I made breakfast, nothing fancy, just eggs and bacon. Coffee's fresh." "Thanks," James replied, helping himself to a mug from the cabinet Peter pointed to. "I slept better than I expected." Too. They ate at the small kitchen table, the conversation lighter than it had been the night before. Peter asked about James's work as an architect, his home in the city, his hobbies. It was strange how ordinary it felt, like any conversation between two people getting to know each other, despite the extraordinary circumstances. "I thought we might go to the bank this morning," Peter said as they washed the dishes together afterward, "to see what's in that safety deposit box." James nodded, feeling a flutter of anticipation. "I'd like that." Pineville First Bank was a modest brick building on the town's main street. Inside, the manager greeted Peter by name and showed them to the safety deposit box room after James presented his ID and the key. "I'll give you some privacy," the manager said, leaving them alone with the metal box that had been retrieved from its vault. James slid the key into the lock and turned it. With a deep breath, he opened the lid. Inside was a collection of items carefully wrapped in tissue paper. James lifted out the first bundle and unwrapped it. It was a baby blanket, soft blue with his name embroidered in one corner. "I remember this," he said softly. "Mom kept it in her cedar chest. I never knew why she saved it." The next item was a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond ring, modest in size but beautifully set in a gold band. "My engagement ring," Peter said, his voice tight with emotion. "I didn't know she had kept it all these years." There was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, love letters Peter had written to Linda during their time together. A few small toys that must have been James's as a baby. A pressed flower in a frame, preserved from some significant moment in their past. At the bottom of the box was a sealed envelope addressed to James and Jenny, and beside it, a thick, legal document. James opened the document first. "It's a revised will," he said, scanning the pages. "Dated just 3 months ago. Mom left most of what she had to me and Jenny, as we expected. But she also left something to you, Peter. Her collection of first edition books and..." He paused, surprised. "A quarter of her savings, to be put into a trust for any educational needs of her grandchildren." Peter shook his head in wonder. She always did think ahead. James turned to the envelope next, opening it carefully. Inside was another letter, and several official-looking papers. "She's amended my birth certificate," James said, examining the papers. "She filed the paperwork to add you as my biological father. It's all legal, just waiting for my signature to process it." He looked up at Peter. "She was really tying up all the loose ends, wasn't she?" "That sounds like Linda," Peter replied with a sad smile. "Always thorough." James unfolded the letter and read it aloud, sensing that its contents were meant for Peter to hear as well. "My dear children, by now James has met Peter and you both know the truth I kept hidden for so long. Jenny, I'm sorry you're learning this through a letter rather than from me directly. I had hoped to tell you both in person, But time has a way of running out faster than we expect. I've left these mementos for you to help you understand the full story of your family. The baby blanket was one Peter's mother made when I told her I was pregnant, before our breakup. She never got to give it to you, James, but I saved it all these years as a connection to the family you never knew. I've also taken steps to legally acknowledge Peter as James's biological father. This doesn't change anything about how Robert loved and raised you. He was your father in every way that matters. But the truth deserves to be acknowledged, and Peter deserves to be recognized for the role he should have had the chance to play in your life. Jenny, though Peter isn't your biological father, I hope you'll get to know him too. He's a good man who would have loved you both if given the chance. I know this revelation comes with pain and confusion. I've asked myself 1,000 times if I made the right choice in keeping this secret. I don't have a good answer. I only know that I did what I thought was best at the time, trying to protect the family we had built. Please try to forgive me for my silence, and please give yourselves the gift of knowing Peter. Let yourselves be curious about this branch of your family tree that's been hidden from view. There are aunts, uncles, cousins you've never met. Peter can introduce you to those who are still with us. Most of all, know that families come in many forms, and ours is just more complicated than most. The love is no less real for all its complexity. All my love. Always, Mom. James folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioning. She thought of everything, he said finally. That was Linda, Peter replied. Always 10 steps ahead of everyone else. They packed the items back into the box, except for the legal papers that needed to be filed and the letters, which Peter asked if he could read privately later. James agreed. They were his words, after all, written to the woman they had both fought. Outside the bank, they stood in the sunshine, squinting against its brightness. What now? Peter asked, uncertainty in his voice. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about what kind of future they might build from here. James thought for a moment. I need to head back home tomorrow. I've got work on Monday. But maybe I could come back next weekend. Bring Jenny if she can make it. The hope that bloomed on Peter's face was answer enough. I'd like that very much. And maybe, James added, you could come visit us sometime. See where I live. Meet my friends. He hesitated, then added, meet my girlfriend Amy. We've been together 3 years now. She'd want to know you. I'd be honored, Peter said, his voice thick with emotion. As they walked back to Peter's house, James felt something shift inside him. Not a sudden change, but the beginning of one. The anger he had initially felt toward his mother for her secrets was softening into understanding. The confusion about his identity was giving way to a sense that he was still himself, just with a bigger story than he had known before. Peter, he said as they reached the house, there's something I've been wondering. All those years alone, did you ever wish you had a family of your own? Peter unlocked the front door and stepped inside before answering. I dated occasionally over the years. There were a couple of women I might have married, but something always held me back. He smiled sadly. I think, without knowing it, I was waiting for your mother. Or maybe for this, the chance to know the son I never knew I had. That afternoon, they sat on Peter's back porch, looking out at his garden. Peter showed James old photo albums of his side of the family. Grandparents James had never known existed. Aunts and uncles who would be surprised to learn they had a nephew. There were cousins close to James's age who shared his dark hair and tall build. The family resemblance unmistakable now that he knew to look for it. I see myself in them, James marveled, studying a group photo from a family reunion. I always thought I looked like Mom, but now I can see how much of me comes from your side too. You have my father's hands, Peter observed, and my mother's eyes. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, James felt less like a visitor and more like someone finding his way home to a place he hadn't known he was missing. Tomorrow he would return to his regular life, but it would no longer be the same. The compass of his identity had shifted, pointing now in a new direction, not erasing the past but adding to it, enriching it with new connections and possibilities. "I wish Mom could see us now," he said as the sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "I think this is what she was hoping for." "I think so too," Peter agreed quietly. In her own way, even at the end, she was still trying to fix what had been broken all those years ago. Together they watched the daylight fade, two men linked by blood and by the woman who had loved them both, beginning the journey from strangers to family, one conversation at a time. 6 months had passed since that life-changing weekend in Pineville. The seasons had turned from spring to summer, summer to fall, and now the first hints of winter could be felt in the crisp morning air. James stood at the window of his apartment, coffee in hand, watching the city come to life below. So much had changed in those 6 months. The paperwork acknowledging Peter as his biological father had been processed. He had met cousins, aunts, and uncles he never knew existed, most of them welcoming him with open arms and curious questions. Jenny had flown down from Seattle to meet Peter, approaching the situation with her typical caution at first, but gradually warming to the man who should have been part of their lives all along. James's phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Amy. "Just picked up Peter at the airport. Traffic's bad, but should be there in about 45 minutes. James smiled. Amy had been his rock through all of this. When he'd returned from that first trip to Pineville and told her everything, she had listened without judgment, then helped him navigate the complex emotions that followed. She had been the one to suggest inviting Peter to stay with them for Thanksgiving this year, the first major holiday since the revelation. He texted back a quick thanks, then turned his attention to the preparations. The small dining table was already set with his best dishes, a mismatched collection he and Amy had picked up at various thrift stores and yard sales over the years. The turkey was in the oven, filling the apartment with savory aromas. Jenny would arrive later with her new boyfriend, and a couple of close friends would round out their Thanksgiving gathering. A framed photo now sat on his bookshelf, one he had found in his mother's safety deposit box. It showed Linda and Peter, in their youth, arms wrapped around each other, both laughing at something long forgotten. James had made a copy for himself and returned the original to Peter. Sometimes he found himself staring at it, trying to imagine how different his life might have been if his grandmother hadn't interfered, if his mother had known the truth sooner. He had felt anger toward his grandmother at first, learning how she had deliberately separated his parents with her lies. But over time, that anger had softened. She had been a product of her generation, with rigid ideas about suitable matches for her daughter. Her actions had caused decades of pain, yet they had also led indirectly to James's existence, to the family he had known growing up. It was too complex to reduce to simple judgments of right and wrong. The doorbell rang, startling James from his thoughts. That was odd. Amy and Peter wouldn't be here for at least half an hour, and Jenny wasn't due until afternoon. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and went to answer. Standing in the hallway was a woman about his age with familiar features that made his heart skip a beat. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she clutched a small gift bag, looking nervous. "James Taylor?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, confused. "I'm Lisa Wilson," she said, extending her hand. "Peter's niece. Your cousin, I guess." James stared at her in surprise. "Lisa? But I thought you lived in California." She nodded. "I do. I flew in to surprise Uncle Peter for Thanksgiving. He doesn't know I'm here. I've been planning it with Amy for weeks." "Amy knows about this?" James laughed, stepping back to invite her in. She didn't say a word. Lisa smiled, entering the apartment. "She's good at keeping secrets. Better than me, anyway. I nearly ruined the surprise twice by almost posting about my travel plans online." As Lisa looked around the apartment, James studied her face. The family resemblance was clear. They had the same dark eyebrows, the same shape to their jaw. It was still strange to see his own features reflected in the faces of relatives he was just getting to know. "I brought you something," Lisa said, holding out the gift bag. "It's not much, but when Uncle Peter told me about you, I remembered these were in my attic." James accepted the bag and pulled out a small photo album. Opening it, he found pictures of family gatherings from decades ago, cookouts, Christmas celebrations, birthday parties, and there, in several of the photos, was his mother, young and smiling, her arm linked with Peter's. "These were my mom's," Lisa explained. "She was Peter's sister. She passed away a few years ago, but she saved everything. These are from when your mom was dating Uncle Peter. I thought you might like to have them." James leafed through the album, speechless. Here was photographic evidence of the life that might have been. His mother surrounded by the Wilson family, clearly happy and at home among them. "Thank you," he finally managed to say. "This means a lot." Lisa smiled. "There's one more thing. In there." At the bottom of the bag was a small velvet box. Inside was a silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny key. "That was your mom's," Lisa said. "Uncle Peter gave it to her for their 1-year anniversary. The key was supposed to symbolize that she had the key to his heart, or something sweet like that. My mom kept it after they broke up. Linda left it behind when she cleared out her dorm room. Mom always meant to return it someday but never did." James held the delicate bracelet in his palm. Another piece of his mother's past returned to him. "The key is with Peter," he murmured, repeating his mother's last words. "What?" Lisa asked. "Nothing," James replied, smiling softly. "Just something," my mom said. By the time Amy arrived with Peter, the apartment was filled with the rich smell of Thanksgiving dinner. Peter's face when he saw his niece was a picture of shock and joy. There were hugs, laughter, a few tears as he realized the effort that had gone into surprising him. "You knew about this?" he asked James, who just grinned and pointed at Amy. "Blame. The mastermind," he said. "She coordinated everything." As the afternoon progressed, more guests arrived. Jenny and her boyfriend brought wine and homemade cranberry sauce. James's friends David and Tina came with additional side dishes and wide-eyed curiosity about meeting the newly discovered father. They gathered around the table, a makeshift family of relatives old and new, friends who were as close as family, all brought together by a series of events that had started with 5 whispered words from a dying mother. "Before we eat," Peter said, raising his glass, "I'd like to say something." The table fell quiet. "I've spent many Thanksgivings alone, over the years. I'd convinced myself that was just my lot in life, but today," his voice wavered slightly, "today I'm surrounded by family I never thought I'd have. My niece, who flew across the country to surprise me. My son and his wonderful girlfriend, who opened their home to me. Jenny, who had every reason to keep her distance but chose to welcome me instead." He raised his glass higher. "And though she's not here with us, I want to thank Linda too. Even at the end, she found a way to heal old wounds and bring us all together." "To Mom," James said, raising his own glass. "To Linda," echoed the others. After dinner, while the others chatted in the living room, James slipped away to the kitchen to start on the dishes. A few moments later, Amy joined him, bumping his hip playfully with hers as she picked up a dish towel. "You okay?" she asked softly. "You got quiet during dessert." James nodded, passing her a wet plate to dry. "Just thinking about everything. How different this day is from last Thanksgiving. Last year Mom was still with us, but so sick, and I had no idea about Peter, about any of this." He gestured toward the living room where laughter could be heard. "It's strange how life can change so completely in such a short time." Amy leaned against the counter, studying his face. "Good change though, right?" "Good change," he agreed. "Complicated, but good. I like your family," she said. "Both the old parts and the new parts." James smiled at her, struck by a sudden thought. "Would you like to be part of it? Officially, I mean." Amy's eyes widened. "James Taylor, are you proposing to me in the middle of doing Thanksgiving dishes?" He laughed, suddenly nervous. "I guess I am. Not how I planned it. I have a ring in my sock drawer. I was going to wait until our trip to the mountains next month, do something romantic. But standing here with everything that's happened this year, it just feels right. Life's too short to wait for the perfect moment." Amy put down her dish towel and stepped closer to him. My answer's yes, by the way, in case you were wondering. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the leftover turkey wrapped up, after Jenny had teasingly demanded to see the ring and Peter had hugged them both with tears in his eyes, James and Amy stood on the small balcony of their apartment. The night was cold but clear, stars visible despite the city lights. "Do you think your mom somehow knew all this would happen?" Amy asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "When she told you to find Peter, do you think she imagined today?" James thought about it, about the chain of events his mother had set in motion with her final words. The key she had mentioned had unlocked so much more than just a safety deposit box. It had unlocked an entire family history, connections that spanned decades, possibilities for the future he never could have imagined. "I think she hoped," he said finally. "I think she knew Peter well enough to believe he would welcome me, and she knew me well enough to trust I would be open to knowing him. The rest?" He smiled, looking out at the city lights below. The rest was just life unfolding, in its own way. Inside, he could hear the warm buzz of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. His family expanded now in ways he never could have predicted, enjoying each other's company, building new memories to carry forward. His mother's last gift to him hadn't been just the truth about his father. It had been the understanding that family was more fluid, more forgiving and more expansive than he had ever realized. That it could be remade, even after decades of separation. That love, in all its complicated forms, had a way of finding paths forward, even when those paths seemed long closed. As the first snowflakes of the season began to fall around them, James put his arm around Amy and turned back toward the warm light of their home, grateful for the whispered words that had changed everything.